Game developers are getting so lazy. They used to make 10 quintillion games a year, and now they make a game once every quintillennium. The game industry is so over. r/gaming and every other major gaming forum makes me recoil so hard that my head touches my own ass. Of course video games take longer to make than they used to, you capital L lemon. Especially as technology evolves and developers get more tools to execute greater ambitions. The bigger the studio, the more complicated game development gets. But what happens when so many deadlines get missed? When technology evolves faster than the game can keep up with? When managers abuse their staff, creating a toxic and disturbing work environment? Or if your game idea just sucked to begin with and upper management was like, yeah, let's throw 200 million into this. Development hell is a game development on that's existed since before Mrs. Pac-Man could make the same wage as Pac-Man. And it can happen to anybody, whether you're a solo developer or part of a team. Fortress 2. Like all of the best competitive shooters, Team Fortress started out as a mod, and it was a mod for Quake and Quake World before the dev team got hired by Valve to make Team Fortress a mod for Half-Life. After a while, Team Fortress got its own standalone version as part of Half-Life's 1.1 update. At first glance, the game pretty much looks like Counter-Strike, but there are actually many distinct differences in design. Counter-Strike's formula follows a bunch of semi-realistic or relatable scenarios, like planting a bomb or guarding a hostage, while Team Fortress tries to give the player the most unapologetic video game fun as possible. There's a big emphasis on constant movement because of the goofy game modes like Capture the Flag, King of the Hill, and a few other game modes along the same lines of nonsensical fun. Which is why it was so weird that Team Fortress 2 was supposed to be a realistic war simulator when development began in 1998. Team Fortress 2 wasn't going to be any war simulator though. Even early iterations of what it ended up being were still far from what other AAA shooters were doing at the time, such as a feature where players could parachute into enemy territory, and there was supposed to be a command hierarchy, including a cut commander class that would view the maps from a bird's eye perspective and direct players on what to do. The class ended up being cut because people could just not listen to the commander, and if you've been playing Night Rain recently, you probably know how unfun that is. Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms was revealed at E3 1999, and it's the closest we will ever get to seeing what the original version of TF2 would have looked like, because in June of 2000, Valve announced Team Fortress 2 would be delayed, and then they went quiet for 6 years before speaking of the game again. There were a lot of issues with Team Fortress 2 Brotherhood of Arms. One, the visual style of the game didn't line up with the fast-paced, nonsensical matches. It's like they were trying to make two contradictory design elements play nice together, which is why it took about 4 attempts until Valve finally settled on a design choice for Team Fortress 2, which they revealed at the EA Summer Showcase event in 2006. Team Fortress 2's new cartoony spy aesthetic fixed a bunch of issues from previous versions of the game, such as classes not being visually identifiable at high speeds, but the new distinct designs of each character and weapons fixed that problem. The exaggerated proportions and character models allowed Valve to utilize their in-house engines, the Source Engine's facial expression technology, and speaking of the Source Engine, one of the main issues of Team Fortress 2, which inevitably delayed the game, was that Valve kept moving TF2 to different video game engines. But even though the game went through a handful of changes over the course of 9 years, it turned out to be a massive success for the team, and in conclusion, is one of the happier stories of development hell on this list. Sometimes it's better to just start from square one, even if it's been a really long time, because even today, Team Fortress 2 still has a sizable community, and due to its art style, doesn't look nearly as dated as a 2007 game should. But alas, my scally weapons, success can only exist when there is tragedy, and nothing was quite as tragic as the launch of When you think Ubisoft pirate game, the first title to pop into your head will no doubt be Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Black Flag had a beautiful open world, odd immersive details that helps ground the game from its unrealistic Assassin's Creed gameplay loop, and naval combat where you could board enemy ships and loot them dry even if they didn't have a lot to begin with. Also, for some reason, a lot of people, including myself, can only run the game by going into the files and running the game through compatibility mode for Windows 95. Why? I don't know. It's just part of the fun of being a PC gamer, man. PC Master Race, am I right? Well, after the success of Black Flag, Ubisoft Singapore began development on an expansion for Black Flag that eventually turned into its own standalone title that would have been called Black Flag Infinite. Eventually, they had to scrap Black Flag Infinite and start a new independent pirate game because the engine and technology for the game became outdated for a Black Flag spin-off. At E3 2017, Ubisoft officially announced Skull and Bones for PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One, revealing it to be a multiplayer pirate game, and it got generally good reception upon announcement. Now here's where the issues start. Skull and Bones wasn't wasn't going to have any land combat, meaning players could not board ships or even fight enemies on any of the islands around the world. Every ounce of action was restricted to naval warfare. The game was set to be released in the fourth quarter of 2018, and then 2019, and then 2020, and then in an investor's call in October of 2019, the CEO of Ubisoft announced another delay to a very uncertain 2021. While the game wasn't nearly as anticipated as Cyberpunk or The Last of Us Part 2, it was getting frustrating for the people who were actually excited for Skull and Bones. In September of 2020, the coronavirus had run rampant, and developers all across the globe were struggling to work on their projects due to government-issued restrictions. And in the midst of all the chaos, Ubisoft Singapore announced that while development was continuing on Skull and Bones, a new vision of the game had begun, which basically meant that the development was being restarted with a bit of a head start with the help of recycled assets from previous versions. During development, the game's target location changed a lot. First, they wanted to take place in the Caribbean, and then Hyperborea, and then finally they settled on East Africa and Southeast Asia. In 2022, the target year for release, the team behind Skull and Bones made another big announcement stating that the game will not be released on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One like originally planned, and would be exclusive to PC, Xbox Series X and S, and the PlayStation 5. At this point, so many visions of the game had been developed, scrapped, and recycled into a new project. Ubisoft had spent $200 million making sure that the project could reach the potential that they saw it had in 2013, and Skull and Bones was a mess of ideas jam-packed into one game, and that came to light once the game was released and critically ashamed by pretty much every major gaming outlet in 2024. Except IGN for some reason, where the reviewer did indeed enjoy the game, and hey, all power to it. I'll always be a supporter of finding fun in something that everybody shits on. But the real nail in the coffin for Skull and Bones was when Yves Guillemot, the CEO of Ubisoft, made the infamous claim that Skull and Bones was a quadruple A game. Imagine working so long on a project that was doomed from the beginning just to curse it even further by setting such an impossible expectation on it. I guess when you're in Ubisoft's situation and you just keep taking L after L, you'll start throwing punches in any direction hoping one hits, but that was kind of insane. Unlike Team Fortress 2, Skull and Bones didn't make it out of development hell in a good state, and will continue to be remembered as a game that really tried to capture the magic of its spiritual predecessor, but lacked one key element from the very beginning: direction. Which is why whenever Ubisoft announces a new game, you should probably ask yourself if they're telling the truth, whether you should doubt them, or if they're telling a lie. And hey, at least the CEO of Ubisoft didn't mentally torment his staff. In 2002, there was this video game writer and director named Brendan McNamara. He left Team Soho after the success of their British crime drama video game, The Getaway. He decided to form Team Bundy alongside a handful of ex-Team Soho developers, and they signed a deal with Sony to release a game for the PlayStation 3, which ended up being the 1940s detective thriller period piece, L.A Noire.
LAPD homicide.
John Ferdinand Jameson.
We need you to answer some questions, John.
If you don't mind, I prefer Ferdinand.
What were you doing to the body, Ferdinand?
I was kissing.
In 2006, publishing rights got transferred from Sony to Rockstar, and Rockstar partnered with Team Bundy on development. While this was shaping up to be the success story of a lifetime, there was one smidgen of an issue, and it's that Brendan McNamara, he kind of got a little angry. L.A Noire had been in development since 2004, and the game used a ton of advanced technology to accomplish its innovative and ambitious design, like motion scan, for example, so there was a lot of pressure from Rockstar to put the game out on time, especially since the higher-ups at the studio were suspicious and doubtful of the preparation it took Team Bundy to get the actors ready for facial scanning, which took a long time because they needed extensive makeovers beforehand for the tech to work correctly. Brendan McNamara had lofty goals during L.A Noire's development, hoping that Rockstar would acquire the studio as one of its own branches, but because the organization and workflow of Team Bundy was so horrendous, the developers at Rockstar began to realize that there was no way in hell that was happening, as staff from Rockstar were frequently sent down to the studio to get things done for them. After the release of L.A Noire, a ton of staff anonymously spoke out against Brendan McNamara, claiming he was verbally abusive and controlling in the workplace, having staff work over 110 hours a week, including weekends. One quote stated that if you left your shift at 7:30, you get evil eyes from the other developers pressured to work late, and Brendan did absolutely nothing about it, and instead encouraged the impossible work situation due to his ever-crumbling goal of becoming a Rockstar Games developer.
Brendan, please, I haven't seen my kids in weeks. Can I please work 100 hours this week instead of 110?
Of course, pal. Whatever you think is best. I will see to it.
Off topic, but I think it's ironic that Rockstar didn't acquire Team Bundy because of the horrendous work conditions that the company had normalized, but they did the exact same thing with every other game they developed. In the book Jacked, a documentary about Rockstar Games and Grand Theft Auto, the author reported that the Hauser brothers held deep-fried cheese eating competitions for new developers and provided buckets for them to puke into after hours. What? While L.A Noire ended up being a massive success, the atrocious work conditions at Team Bundy resulted in the studio shutting down. But even though Rockstar said goodbye to Team Bundy with a smile and a wave, they couldn't quite let go of Brendan McNamara, as his new company, Video Games Deluxe, collaborated with Rockstar twice since L.A Noire. Once on the VR case files, and another time just a few months ago with the release of the new update for the GTA Trilogy Definitive Editions. Last March, Rockstar acquired Video Games Deluxe and renamed it to Rockstar Australia, making Brendan McNamara the head of the company's new branch. I don't know if Rockstar thought they cleaned up a little too much since Red Dead 2 and wanted to bring back that classic Rockstar spice to their work environment, but all jokes aside, that was 14 years ago, and if you get a bunch of allegations thrown at you, you'll probably clean up your act. That is, if you did those things in the first place. It's absolutely not my place to say whether this is a good or bad thing for Rockstar, but one thing is for certain. It is interesting. But aside from all that, at least L.A Noire released on its originally intended console, which can't be said about Out of all the games on this list, you've probably heard about Mother 3 the most, and it was in development for 12 years. Did I hear 12 years? Get out of here, Chris Tyson! In 1994, Nintendo began production on Mother 3 for the SNES, but because Mario 64 was such a smash hit, they moved development over to target the Nintendo 64, thinking that the 3D capabilities would allow for the game to shine even brighter. But because of their expectations for the game, the Nintendo 64 couldn't even keep up, and halfway through development on Earthbound 64, the name of the project at the time, they scaled back and planned how they would execute this behemoth of a project. Miyamoto wanted the game to be like a Hollywood film. He also wanted the town to grow over time, and early on, wanted the game released by 1996, just 2 years after they started the project. Even though there was a clear lack of direction around this time, Miyamoto had a plan, John. Despite the Nintendo 64's shortcomings, Nintendo was plotting to release an expansion to the N64 called the 64DD, which offered a bigger storage capacity than the standard cartridges. And just like that, Nintendo was back in the game, planning for Mother 3 to be a launch title for the 64DD. Unfortunately, the N64DD flopped hard, which is ridiculous because technology named after a successful console with something else at the end of the name never fails. Inevitably, Mother 3 was pushed back to target the base N64. In 1999, Nintendo showed off Mother 3 for the very first time, but sadly, 1 year later, Shigesato Itoi would confirm that the project had been cancelled after delaying it over and over and over again. Satoru Iwata, one of the producers for Mother 3, made it clear that the project wasn't cancelled for the Nintendo 64 because they didn't know what to do with it, but because they needed their resources for the upcoming Nintendo GameCube, or Project Dolphin as it was known at the time. And a last little not so fun fact about Mother 3's development. In 1999, Iwata was so stressed about the game that he ended up being hospitalized, and who could blame him? Iwata himself claimed in an interview that by the time they realized Mother 3 couldn't work on the 64DD, they scrapped 6 years worth of development. And according to the team, Mother 3 wasn't just some small project. It was, in their own words, a behemoth. For 3 years, it was quiet. Grand Theft Auto 3 and then Vice City took gaming by storm and revolutionized what 3D open worlds could be. One of the best psychological horror games ever made hit store shelves. The Elder Scrolls became a mainstream franchise, and in 2003, it was announced that Mother 3 was finally coming back and was going to come out on Nintendo's newest handheld console, the Game Boy Advanced. Even though the game's 3D perspective changed to 2D, the original narrative of Earthbound 64 remained intact. Mother 3 turned out to be a massive success in Japan when it came out. And, oh yeah, it only released in Japan. Iwata claimed that he was genuinely ashamed that him and the team were so caught up in the Nintendo 64 3D craze that it blinded them from what they could actually pull off, and in turn slowed down development. The game still turned out great once it actually came out, because at the end of the day, mistakes are going to happen, whether you're a massive corporation or a small team of programmers. And even if Mother 3 took a long time to come out, at least it didn't kill its franchise and cause its development studio to be known as gaming's biggest development tragedy forever. Duke Nukem forever. Duke Nukem was successful before its third entry, but it is and always will be known as one of the classicest first-person shooters on PC, alongside Doom and Wolfenstein. Duke Nukem 3D came out in 1996, and even if at first glance it looks like its FPS cousins, what set it apart was its satirical approach to action movie culture. So the game maximizes its protagonist's masculinity, slaps sexual content all over the place.
I'm speechless. And kind of disgusted.
My disappointment is immeasurable. And my day is ruined.
And is overwhelmingly action-packed. It's kind of like what your mom thinks Grand Theft Auto is like. Artistically, it's a very stylistic and impressive game. The 2D sprites used for guns and enemies are super detailed and have tons of variants for movement, which despite its old graphics design, still looks good today because of the sheer amount of work put into it. In 1996, Duke Nukem 3D wasn't just action, sex, and art though, it was impressive, fun, and sold 3.5 million copies. With the success of Duke Nukem 3D, 3D Realms, the developer behind the hit, knew they had to make a brand new, innovative masterpiece, and it was this expectation that doomed the project eternally. 3D Realms kicked off development on Duke Nukem Forever in 1997 and announced that the game would be released by Christmas of 1998. Scott Miller, one of the co-founders of 3D Realms, believed Duke Nukem would be a franchise with longevity, like James Bond and Mario, and it was shortly after that they canceled the first version of Duke Nukem Forever because it used two-dimensional sprites and enemies like the previous entry. Due to 3D Realms being obsessed with innovation, they knew they had to upgrade to full 3D, and when they showed off their vision of the new game at E3 1998, people were stoked to see how advanced the formula had gotten with building destruction, combat over a moving truck, and real-time women physics. For this new iteration of Duke Nukem Forever, the team was using the Quake 2 engine, but a few weeks after the reveal trailer, 3D Realms announced that they'd be switching to the new Unreal Engine for development on the game. The reason for all the sudden change of plans during development was because George Broussard, one of the co-founders of 3D Realms, was obsessed with the idea of innovation and couldn't stand the idea of Duke Nukem Forever being outdated at launch. And this paranoia continued to slow down production. Once the early 2000s rolled around, life at 3D Realms was strange. Take-Two Interactive purchased the rights to publish Duke Nukem Forever and was hoping it would be done by 2001, but the staff at 3D Realms believed George had no idea what he even wanted from Duke Nukem Forever. According to the team, it seemed to be a chaotic mess of tech demos around that time. Anytime George would see something innovative in another game, he wanted it in Duke Nukem Forever. So prototypes were constantly being made with no vision whatsoever of where they would fit in the actual finished project. As fans grew increasingly concerned about the game, Broussard would continue to reiterate that Duke Nukem Forever will be released when it's done, which has since become an infamous quote in the community. By E3 2001, another trailer for the game finally came around, and once again, it was received well by the general public. But even though everybody thought things were going well from the project, George Broussard still had no idea what he wanted the final project to be. Or I guess more accurately, too many ideas of what he wanted the final project to be. According to a former employee, there were only 18 people working on the project by 2003, and in 2006, George Broussard reported to a journalist at a convention that they had fucked up. Basically, we threw everything out the window and started again. That was 8 years after development started. Up to this point, there was one instance where 3D Realms could have saved their project. A Canadian team known as Digital Extremes offered to take over development of Duke Nukem Forever, but the people at 3D Realms didn't want them to take on the project, which Scott Miller later remarked as a fatal suicide shot. By 2009, people were exhausted. Employees were leaving left and right. The project had been cut down in size, but still no progress was being made. Miller and Broussard asked Take-Two Interactive for $6 million to finish Duke Nukem Forever. And after Take-Two denied their proposition, George Broussard and Scott Miller laid off the team and ceased development. Can you imagine being a developer and hearing that shit? Hey guys, so you know that project you've been working on for 11 years? Yeah, actually you've been working for nothing this whole time, and you're gonna need a new job. You know what though, I hear Rockstar's working on a spy game. Some of the ex-employees formed a new studio called Triptych Games, and worked on the project from their homes, but Take-Two Interactive had already spent $12 million with the idea that they'd be publishing a finished game. So they filed a lawsuit against 3D Realms. Despite looking like it was the end of Duke Nukem, Gearbox Software, the developers behind Borderlands, came in clutch and got the rights for the then hopeless game to finish the project. On June 10th, 2011, Duke Nukem Forever released for the world to see, and after 14 years of waiting, It was okay. It's not really Gearbox's fault that Duke Nukem Forever turned out to be a jumbled mess of 90s game mechanics blended with modern gameplay elements that constantly conflict with each other. The game was made with the idea that it was going to be a brand new, amazing game that could do everything, but unfortunately, it was still to the core a game that started in 1998. In 2022, Scott Miller wrote a blog post about the failure of Duke Nukem Forever and attributed it to engine swaps, staff turnover, and a general lack of direction, to which George Broussard responded on Twitter saying, "Scott's a clueless narcissist whose actions are what led to the Gearbox suit/friction that led to us losing 3DR and the Duke IP. Mind-blowing the nonsense he spews. Not surprising due to his depth of manipulation and narcissism. Least I've had the class to keep thoughts private." George Broussard said calmly. There seems to be a pattern with games that go through development hell, and it's that a lot of those games were made by people with extremely lofty goals. But at least with Valve, Rockstar, and Nintendo, the people running those companies had a lot of experience. Alex Mahan, or more commonly known as Yandere Dev, left an unknown video game company in the early 2010s. Having already worked on 5 mobile games and 5 console games, he realized he had bigger dreams and decided to begin prototyping an independent video game project about a murderous schoolgirl based off of the Yandere anime trope, which in short means someone who is so in love with somebody that it becomes obsessive and psychopathic.
What the do you want? What the do you want?
I'm gonna play with your scrote and eat your balls. While the formula of the game may seem simple, where the player needs to eliminate 8 of her crush's love interests to be the only one that he could possibly ever have, it's actually much more complicated than that, because all 8 rivals have a ton of ways to eliminate them, known as the elimination methods, which varies from befriending the love interest and telling her to buzz off, matchmaking the love interest with another character from school, getting the love interest expelled by framing them, setting them up to do a bunch of crappy stuff to senpai so that he hates them, various forms of murder, driving a student insane through torture and killing them, kidnapping, among other things. Basically, this game is a fucking behemoth because each elimination method is a whole other game in itself, especially features like the matchmaking method, which has a whole mini game attached to it. It's a very deep stealth game with one guy making all of it. On the 1st of April 2014, Yandere Dev went on 4chan and pitched the idea of Yandere Simulator, which garnered positive reception among the people who saw the post. After that fateful day, Yandere Dev began developing the game's core mechanics like murder, the sanity meter, and cleaning up a crime scene. And once 2015 rolled around, features were getting added left and right. Suddenly there was a school, students, teachers, senpai could get uncomfortable with the main character's behavior, poisoning a lunch, torture, kidnapping, and so much content was added. The game was finally starting to shape into what the original concept described. But as the game's development continued, its popularity skyrocketed, which was a good thing and a bad thing for the project. With Markiplier and a whole bunch of YouTubers playing Yandere Simulator because of how out there and fun the concept was, the game got a very large fan base and also got the attention of a lot of children who constantly flooded the developer's email, which resulted in development time slowing down because Yandere Dev had to filter out the filler from the helpful emails like asset deals. Also, with a brand new fan base, Yandere Dev had to choose between progressing the game, which would take a very long time and would stimulate the fan base in a much larger interval, or start making content that would take time away from development but entertain the general audience throughout each update. So he started making mini games and YouTube videos to make the wait for Yandere Simulator a little less brutal for the fans who were excited for it. The problem with a game as big as Yandere Simulator being made by one person is that there's no world where it wouldn't burn the developer out, especially one who's rapidly learning better code organization for an indie game that takes on the scale of a AAA title. So in early 2017, Yandere Dev announced that he would be partnering with TinyBuild, which is an experienced publisher known for helping indie developers like Dynamic Pixels with Hello Neighbor. This was good news for Yandere Simulator, because TinyBuild would provide a team of experienced programmers to help speed up development. But in June of 2018, Yandere Dev announced that his partnership with TinyBuild had ended at the end of 2017 because him and the other lead programmer had a lot of creativity disagreements. Around this time, people started discovering the chaotic code that was holding up Yandere Simulator, which, as we all know, started a lot of controversy. But to be fair to the game, it's in development. Yandere Dev needed to keep updating the game, but the lead programmer kept wanting to fix the game's messy code, and for that to happen, Yandere Dev would need to stop making content for several months, which would leave the community he had built over the years abandoned with no new content. By 2020, 6 years after the game started development, the first love interest was finally added into the game, with 7 more to go. The year is 2025. The second rival got added into Yandere Simulator just a bit ago, and the design for her is open-ended, just as the developer intended, with a brand new overhaul coming soon, and a prediction of late 2026 or early 2027 for the release date. As somebody that is or was an enjoyer of Persona, and I hate to admit it, Future Diary, which were major inspirations for the project, I'd like to see what the finished version of Yandere Simulator, or I guess what it's actually going to be called, Lovesick, will look like. But because there's 6 more rivals to go and a whole lot of assets to remodel, I might be asking my son to tell me all about it when he visits me in the retirement home. And especially with the examples the developer posts on how he'd like the finished game to look, we have a long way to go. I feel like outside of the developer, my main criticism with the game is that it's kind of a goon fest in the way that mainstream anime was in the early 2000s, and I feel like society has moved on since then and is able to recognize the clear sexist and creepy undertones that should not be glorified in media, especially something like Yandere Simulator, which is not only popular among kids, but aims to have an audience generally in North America. I think there's a difference between sexual content that might be in a video game and shit that just completely comes off as rapist bait. Yandere Dev kind of made his career and shot himself in the foot at the same time by indirectly announcing the game before development even started. Oh hey, didn't another game do that? Cyberpunk 2077 was announced in May 2012 and got a trailer in 2013, which would have been cool if they were already working on the game, but for some reason CD Projekt Red decided it would be a genius idea to announce a brand new title while working on The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and its DLCs post-release. It was only until 2016 when full production on Cyberpunk started. In very early versions of Cyberpunk, when they were using the Red Engine 3, the game was played in third person, but upon upgrading to 4, the first person POV was decided. Fun fact, the Polish government caught wind of the new big open world game CD Projekt Red was cooking up and donated $7 million to the project for the sake of Night City's environmental detail. So thanks, Polish government. Despite development time, everything was being set up for this to be an awesome launch. They hired Keanu Reeves to play one of the main characters, which was wholesomely Redditacular.
The feeling of being there, of walking the streets of the future, is really going to be breathtaking.
You f***ing gonk.
They partnered with Nvidia and a handful of other companies to make the ray tracing extra breathtaking specifically for Cyberpunk, and the composer for The Witcher 3 came back to make Cyberpunk's soundtrack, and to be fair, all of those things worked out. At launch, the game looked amazing on PC. The soundtrack slapped. Keanu Reeves was Keanu Reeves. But it was also the worst launch in video game history. How did this happen? After an incredible reveal at E3 2018, it not only won 100 awards, but also got a huge audience interested in the title and sold over 8 million pre-orders. Unfortunately, a few months before the expected release date of April 16, 2020, the coronavirus ran rampant around Europe and sent the 500 people developing the game right back home, where they would be working on it from their bedrooms. This was really bad for Cyberpunk, because around this time, the employees were already crunching to finish the project, and with a promised next-gen console port that was supposed to come out that same year, the game's supposed to be optimized for 8th-gen consoles while also being groundbreaking on PC with a plethora of mechanics not being finished yet, even though the game was announced in 2012. There was a lot of pressure. And of course, there were delays, and a lot of angry fans giving the developers death threats, and a launch that lost CD Projekt Red tons of money. The PlayStation and Xbox stores offered full refunds of the game because it didn't even work on the old hardware. And in 2023, the company finally settled a lawsuit with investors owing $1.85 million. The lesson we can all learn from Cyberpunk is, don't announce a game when it's not even being worked on, and don't market it as the pinnacle of gaming, especially when it's not even close to being finished. But Skull and Bones is as an example that history will in fact repeat itself. Fortunately for Cyberpunk, its comeback was pretty insane. Over time, the developers updated the game, making it the awesome open world action adventure title it is today. And on Steam, the game holds a very positive rating, with 85% of people saying they enjoyed their time with it. But the name Cyberpunk 2077 will never not be associated with its atrocious launch, and that wraps up this video. Holy shit, this was a lot. So what games development comes to your mind when you hear the term development hell? I feel like it's very basic, but Duke Nukem Forever has always kind of had that ring to me. 14 years is just absolutely insane, but who knows, GTA 6's lifespan is climbing pretty high, so maybe there will be a huge story about the chaotic development behind it, like what happened with Red Dead 2. Oh, maybe Red Dead 2 is actually the one that comes to my mind when I think about development hell. Let me know in the comments below and I'll check them out as soon as I possibly can. As always, thank you so much. Actually, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch this video, and make sure to have a good one.